Tonight we have the ceremony of the Buddha's Parinirvana. It seems to revolve around light and dark, birth and death. The way we review dark and light is different for all of us. But given the seemingly endless English winter, I think most of us here see the darkness as a time of drawing in, reflecting on loss, facing our own impermanence, a time when we wait for the spring. It can be called the festival of the Buddha's Parinirvana. It can also be called the festival of the Buddha's death. And if we say it is the festival of the Buddha's Parinirvana, what are we saying? That the Buddha went to some kind of transcendental realm, a kind of heaven, a place where we can perhaps join him. If we call it the festival of the Buddha's death, how is that different for us? Most of us have experienced the death of loved ones and know there's a real sense of finality. A dead body is totally different from a living person. Things come to an end. The Buddha's life did end. For me, the whole ceremony, the whole retreat, brings up the question of continuity. How much do we rely on a sense of continuity? How much energy do we spend reassuring ourselves of our own continuity, reassuring ourselves that our loved ones exist somehow? Is that the deepest faith, the deepest understanding? And yet, in a way, the ceremony does point to the way faith grows within darkness. So it can be perhaps a celebration of darkness as well as a celebration of the returning of the light. For without the darkness there's no understanding. And perhaps this is the main theme of this talk. This intimate relationship between light and dark. And this is expressed in some of our daily liturgy. The most excellent Mirror Samadhi we sang this morning, and the Sandokai. But what I don't want to do this morning is do an analysis. We've been looking at how poetry can be a path of awareness this weekend. One of the ways that works is that it allows an open-ended view of our lives. It allows the ambiguous, the uncertain. And for me it is significant that the Sandokai and the Most Excellent Mirror Samadhi were written as poems. They are evocative. They hint. They suggest. They do not tell us how things are. So, to attempt to explain the meaning of such scriptures would be perhaps missing the point. When we say that something means something else, we imply that we could turn it like a scientific textbook can be retranslated and mean the same thing. But we cannot convert a poem into prose and it be the same thing. If there was a different version of one of T.S. Eliot's poems like The Wasteland, it would not have the same meaning. You have to read it. So these evocative scriptures use metaphor that evoke rather than delineate. And part of this is that there's almost a refrain that goes through them both. Do not set up your own standards. We cannot say absolutely what is right and wrong. The metaphors that evoke are central to our practice. Our form of meditation, serene reflection. The original was more like mokusho. It's called this by the Chinese Chan masters like Wanshi Shogaku. Because of the many layers of meaning in the words, it means silent illumination as well. Master Koten wrote an article and he called it luminescent darkness. In the very description of our practice, we have light in darkness, darkness in light. This practice can only be hinted at sideways. In some ways, these scriptures seem like incomplete notes. But they are meant to be contemplated and practiced, rather than used as some kind of ruler to measure up our own practice. So I just want to take a few lines from each of these scriptures and develop the metaphors rather than try and explain them. The most excellent mirror samadhi says, "The night encloses brightness, and at dawn no light shines. Through this we free ourselves from suffering." For me, it also evokes the sun setting over the hill in midwinter. It can be almost a sense of visceral dread as the light dims, and the wish for the light to return. But the silence and the darkness are the condition and setting for the illumination, the brightness. The night encloses brightness. A time of unknowing is perhaps also a time of hidden creativity, uncertainty, a lack of direction. But can we just be content to sit and let that be? Can we sit and not use the sitting to seek for something else? The author of the most excellent Mirror Samadhi was Tozan Ryokai. And there's a dialogue which illustrates this point. Tozan was once asked by a monk, "When cold or heat comes, how can we avoid it?" Tozan said, "Why don't you go where there is no cold or heat?" The monk said, "What do you mean by where there is no cold or heat?" Tozan said, "When it is cold, cold finishes the monk. When it is hot, heat demolishes the monk." So this is not about avoiding what seems difficult, but engaging completely, delving into what is there. When it is dark, let it be completely dark. Perhaps it is the wishing it were otherwise that is the problem, or using some rational thought, some conversation with ourselves sometimes we may say to ourselves, afterwards it will get better. One of the poems we've been looking at this weekend is T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. And I was really struck by a passage in it that evokes that same dread, loss of control. But it puts it in the modern setting of being stuck in the London Underground. When the train breaks down, you get that message that says, don't worry, we're fixing the problem. But it seems to get more and more claustrophobic and hot. You don't really know how long you're going to be stuck there. This is T.S. Eliot here. I said to my soul, be still, and let the dark come upon you, which shall be the darkness of God. As in a theatre the lights are extinguished, for the scene to be changed with a hollow rumble of wings, with a movement of darkness on darkness, and we know that the hills and the trees, the distant panorama, and the bold imposing facade are all being rolled away, or as when an underground train in the tube stops too long between stations, and the conversation rises and slowly fades into silence, and you see behind every face the mental emptiness deepen, leaving only the growing terror of nothing to think about. Or when under ether the mind is conscious but conscious of nothing. I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is, yes, faith, but the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing. It's a powerful image, and it raises the question, what do we do with our minds when in these situations of apparent helplessness, of not knowing? Do we immediately grasp onto a reassuring dialogue? But if we really just sit in darkness, is darkness just darkness? The light encloses brightness, and at dawn no light shines. There is perhaps an even deeper meaning of this, and I think the Zen approach is different from T.S. Eliot's. I wouldn't say that all teaching is the same. When we are waiting tonight during this ceremony, there's a point at which all the candles seem to be extinguished, and everyone waits in darkness for the light to return. But are we really waiting? If we sit still, not wishing for darkness to become light, if we sit as we sit in Zazen, is it waiting? I noticed sitting just now before this talk, this being that sits was not going to become the being giving the talk. This being sitting was just as it was. The future being giving the talk did not exist. You have to, once you've stilled your mind, you can trust the sitting. How is it actually? When you sit in the dark, are you waiting for the light to return? Or is it already sufficient? The being that sits does not concern itself with waiting, the future. In that sense, do we need to long for the light? Do we need to wait for the spring? Is the winter just a winter? Spring just spring? We have to explore what this is, the being sitting. Trust your sense of it. I'll move on to some metaphors in the Sandokai. Our own translation, which is actually from a Japanese teacher, Matsunaga, goes, "From west to east unseen flowed out the mind of India's greatest sage, and to the source kept true as an unsullied stream is pure. Although by wit and dullness it is varied, yet it has no patriarch of south or north." I think, as far as I know, the original did use the metaphors of light and dark a lot more. And here is Shunryu Suzuki's translation. "The mind of the great sage of India is intimately transmitted from west to east. While human faculties are sharp or dull, the way has no northern or southern ancestors. The spiritual source shines clear in the light. The branching streams flow on in the dark." The translations are very different. Both of them point in the same direction. The Sandokai is really about the relationship between the particular and the one, how they are interdependent. Every individual, unique thing expresses the truth in its own way, and this relationship is intimate. Japanese translation of a word mitsu, which can mean secretly, but actually means something intimately passed on face to face. This connects in with the translation. The spiritual source shines clear in the light. The branching streams flow on in the dark. I find Shunryu's own version more powerful because it's not trying to explain things but just using the original imagery, light and dark on water. Imagine we are in a landscape in the evening, sitting quietly, maybe a mountainous landscape. There's a stream emerging from a spring at the bottom of a cliff. It's beginning to get dark, so we cannot see the stream clearly, but only the highlights of the evening light reflected in the ripples of the water. And the stream branches out in a more complex pattern as it flows downhill. Experience, for me, is more like this. The underlying unity, the darkness that allows all things to merge, is not always clear. It is not often seen directly. Only when I forget myself can I see the flashes of light in the rippling streams that flow from the source, the many small tributaries. We can make the scriptures our own. By contemplating them and making the metaphors real for ourselves. How is it for us? In the ceremony of the Buddha's death tonight, light and dark used again to suggest death and the continuation of the truth. The light returns because there is a transmission after the Buddha's death. The teaching continues till this day. As the candles are extinguished, we are literally left in the dark, and it can seem like we are lost. The chaplains, though, are collecting our wishes. as we stand there and we chant the scripture of great wisdom, which is a guide through uncertainty and difficulties. But although everything is dark, is it not also intimate? It is not secret exactly, but unrevealed. The stream is still flowing in the darkness, but without the light we cannot yet see the ripples of the water. It is natural to wish for the return of the light, but we can also treasure the quietness and intimacy of the darkness. In some ways, it is not that the chaplains collect our wishes that the light returns, but we recognize the night already encloses brightness, and at dawn no light shines. Even when it is completely dark, is there an aspect of light that is already there? We are practicing mokusho, luminescent darkness. Can we just be with things as they are? When it is hot, let it be completely hot. When it is cold, let it be completely cold. When Tozan, who wrote the most excellent Mirror Samadhi, asked his master how his master would summarize the teaching, his master said, "Just this is it. Just this is it." That relates back to what I said earlier. When we are sitting, when we are waiting in the dark, look at yourself. Is it a being waiting? Does this being become another being? Is it not perfect as it is, in dark and in light? The scripture says, "Now you have, so guard well. The mind of India's greatest sage is already flowing in us, sometimes seems to be light, sometimes seeming to be dark."